$46 billion. That's the number that set everything in motion. Not just a budget request, not just another Washington hearing, but a moment that ripped the cover off an entire playbook of government waste and surveillance overreach. Because when you ask for that kind of money, you'd better come with receipts. And when DHS walked into the hearing room, they didn't bring accountability. They brought excuses. What happened next wasn't your typical political back and forth. It was a rare glimpse into just how far government spending, corporate freeloading, and even secret surveillance have gone without real oversight. And this time, someone wasn't buying it. The first strike landed where everyone expected, the border wall. DHS came asking for $46.5 billion.
Secretary knows, everybody knows that's the end. We're going to try to move on to the next person to get you out of here. We talked a little bit about the wall earlier. The administration has asked for $46.5 billion for the wall. The border on the Mexican border is about 1,950 miles. We've fenced or walled about 700 of it. That leaves about 1,200 miles. There's 200 or 300 miles of it that probably never going to have a fence on. It's mountainous or just impossible to fence or wall. So I would say realistically, you got under 1,000. But let's just say there's 1,000. You really want to wall on 1,000. CBP says it's 6.5 million per mile. Your response today was 12 million per mile. That means $12 billion for 1,000 miles. We're off here by a factor of 3 or 4 with 46 billion. Where's the rest of the 46 billion? The administration says they want 46 billion for a wall. You could pave all of it and still have, 34 billion left over. What's the 34 billion going for?
Yeah, Senator, thank you for the question. We do have 702 miles of wall today. 598 of that are steel. The rest of that is temporary, that's in place. Since the president's been in office, over 70 miles has been erected. We have 11 contracts that have gone out and allocated. We also have 5 more that are pending. Based on the dollars that have been requested, it's not just the infrastructure that would be built, that would be the actual wall construction. It would be also surveillance equipment.
The number's way off. 1,000. You could do 1,000 miles for 12 billion. You're asking for 46 billion. So I'm one who's not impressed and would have to see more detail as to where the rest of the money goes. We can't just throw $30 billion out there and say things cost a lot.
I agree. We'll get you the specifics on that.
With regard to the drones and all the preparatory work that DHS does and the government does for the NFL and for FIFA, does the NFL pay DHS for the work you do?
Boy, not to my knowledge. I will.
Well, I mean, here's my point. The NFL makes billions of dollars. We're $2 trillion in the hole. I don't care if government shares their technology and government helps out the World Cup. They ought to pay.
Yeah,
people are paying hundreds of dollars for tickets. I mean, thousands of dollars for the NFL, for Super Bowl and things. They're also paying for FIFA. And so these people ought to pay. And so I'm one holding up these authorizations, and I'll let them go forward. But I want people to pay. I mean, it's ridiculous that the average taxpayer who could never afford to go to an NFL Super Bowl has got to pay for their security. Should the government help? If we have technology they don't, perhaps. But they ought to pay. So NFL, FIFA, I think they all ought to pay. And we'll be insisting on trying to put language in that. If you're a for-profit entity and the government's helping you, you ought to pay for it. With regard to TSA Quiet Skies and Tulsi Gabbard situation, I suspect there are going to be other people that were caught up in this thing as well. I'm horrified by the idea that we took a former congresswoman and we're surveilling her and riding on jets with her. There was another story of an air marshal whose wife, might have been at January 6th or something, and now we're, have air marshals following another air marshal or his wife. So I want to hear the whole story of what happened. I want to hear that people have been let go, that they're no longer doing this. If there were abuses of Tulsi Gabbard's liberties, I want to hear from that. But I want repercussions to come from this. And I think you've said something's coming. Please let us know, and let us know how the program the destruction of civil liberties can be minimized. I frankly probably have trouble with the whole program, but let's see if there's some way. But we need significant reform. If it needs legislation, please come to us with that. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Secretary Null, for being here.
But here's the math. The U.S. Mexico border stretches about 1,900 miles. Roughly 700 miles are already fenced or walled. That leaves about 1,200 miles. Realistically, some of that can never be fenced. Mountains, deserts, areas where a wall just isn't possible. Even if you take 1,000 miles as the target, Customs and Border Protection Zone figures put the cost at $6.5 million per mile. DHS's number was $12 million per mile. Even at the higher number, that's $12 billion total. So where does the other $34 billion go? Rand Paul hammered the question. And DHS, stumbling through explanations about contracts and infrastructure, had no clear answer. Billions vanished into vague categories and bureaucratic fog. For anyone who's ever balanced a household budget, it felt like watching someone try to justify charging a sports car to your credit card because things cost a lot. But the missing billions weren't even the most outrageous part, because buried in the details was something most Americans have never thought about. DHS doesn't just spend on walls or drones. They provide security support for billion-dollar sports leagues. The NFL, FIFA, the World Cup, all those glitzy mega events that charge fans hundreds, sometimes thousands, for tickets. While owners rake in profits and broadcast deals soar into the billions, taxpayers are quietly footing the bill for government security assistance. Let that sink in. The average American family, the one that can't even dream of affording a Super Bowl ticket, is subsidizing the safety of billion-dollar corporations. Rand Paul pointed it out bluntly. Why should someone $2 trillion in the hole be forced to pay for events they'll never attend? If the NFL and FIFA want federal help, they should pay for it themselves. It's common sense. And yet DHS admitted, almost casually, that no, these leagues don't reimburse taxpayers. Billion-dollar profits privatized, costs quietly socialized. For many viewers, this was the moment the hearing turned from confusing numbers into something crystal clear. Because who hasn't felt that sting of unfairness? But unbelievably, the financial waste wasn't the end of the story. The conversation shifted from money to something far more chilling: surveillance. Specifically, the TSA's Quiet Skies program. Reports suggest it was used to track none other than Tulsi Gabbard, a former congresswoman and presidential candidate. Imagine boarding a plane, and somewhere in the cabin an armed air marshal has been ordered to shadow you. Not because of a credible threat, not because of terrorism alerts, but because of vague, bureaucratic programs that no one can fully explain. That's what Gabbard allegedly experienced. If they can do that to a former member of Congress, what does that say about the rest of us? The implications are staggering. The idea that surveillance could follow anyone, anywhere, without transparency or accountability, transforms air travel into a stage for shadow games. And if you think that's too extreme, the next revelation proved otherwise, because it wasn't just Tulsi Gabbard. Another story surfaced about an air marshal's own wife being targeted because she might have had ties to January 6th. Let that sink in. Federal air marshals, whose mission is to protect flights, were allegedly being redirected to shadow colleagues' families. It sounds absurd, but according to reports, it happened. And Rand Paul wasn't having it. He demanded answers, demanded repercussions, demanded to know whether people had been fired for these abuses. Because if the people who are supposed to guard our skies are instead following political targets, then the entire system is upside down. Instead of protecting Americans, it risks becoming a tool to intimidate them. And when pressed, DHS didn't exactly deny it. They promised reforms, promised to look into it, promised to come back with legislation if needed. But for anyone watching, the damage was done. This wasn't oversight. This was overreach. What tied it all together was a pattern. DHS could not justify the billions they were asking for. They could not explain why billion-dollar corporations get taxpayer-funded perks. They could not reassure the public that surveillance programs weren't being abused. Instead, they leaned on vague promises and bureaucratic language. We'll get you the specifics. We'll come back with details. But how many times have we heard that before? And how many times has it led to nothing? That's why Rand Paul's confrontation resonated far beyond party lines. Because at its core, this wasn't about left or right. It was about accountability, about transparency, about whether the government we fund every April can actually explain what it's doing with the money and power we hand over. The hearing made something clear. There are 3 issues every American should pay attention to. First, massive government waste, billions disappearing into budgets that don't add up. Second, corporate freeloading, Private entities like the NFL and FIFA reaping benefits without paying their share. Third, civil liberties. Programs like Quiet Skies creeping into everyday life, targeting citizens without oversight. These aren't niche issues. They're universal. They affect every taxpayer, every traveler, every citizen. And they cut across political divisions in a way few issues do. Because waste, abuse, and secrecy hurt everyone equally. To be why the time the hearing ended, the message was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a budget debate. It was a wake-up call. A reminder that blank checks without receipts lead to abuse. A reminder that billion-dollar corporations will freeload as long as we let them. A reminder that surveillance powers, once granted, rarely stop at the limits we're told. Rand Paul's grilling wasn't perfect, but it forced the curtain open. And behind it was a system running on excuses instead of accountability. So here's the question that lingers after the hearing. How much longer will Americans tolerate this? How much longer will taxpayers subsidize billionaires, allow surveillance without oversight, and nod along while bureaucrats toss around numbers bigger than most of us can imagine? These aren't abstract debates. They're choices that affect whether your money goes to your community or to corporate giants, whether your freedoms are respected or quietly eroded, whether your government answers to you or expects you to stop asking questions. If you're tired of seeing blank checks written with your money, if you believe billion-dollar leagues should pay their own bills, and if you don't want shadow surveillance programs lurking over your shoulder, then make your voice heard. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more fearless commentary every week. And if you want to go even deeper, join us on Patreon, because independent voices that ask the hard questions can only exist with your support. Together, we can demand better. Not later, not someday, right now.